Welcome to the Fly Culture Podcast, bringing you interviews, reviews and fishing tips. Here's your host, Pete Tigus.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Fly Culture Podcast. I hope you're all doing well and I hope you're managing to get out and go fishing. I managed to hit the river yesterday before all the rain has come. This is being recorded on the 13th of May and I managed to get out just before the rain came yesterday. I come down this morning and the river's come up about 4.5 feet so far this morning, so it looks set to continue, but always looking for the silver lining. I'm hoping it might bring some salmon into the system as well, so I'm really looking forward to that. So that should be good. My guest today has done just about everything you could think of in fly fishing, from wading a saltwater flat searching for tailing permit, competitive distance casting, teaching people to fish, competitive fishing for England, guiding, managing fishing tackle shops, making fishing films, writing articles and photography too. There's probably some other stuff I've forgotten as well, so apologies if I have. But it's my real pleasure to welcome Jonathan Tomlinson to the Fly Culture Podcast today. Jonathan, it's great to have you here. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Pete. It's nice to speak to you.
Likewise. And what are you up to? You managing to get out and do some fishing during these strange times?
Yeah, it's been a bizarre last 12, 13 months. So, like a lot of people, probably not got out anywhere near as much as I would have liked, obviously with the restrictions in travel and things. But yeah, done a lot of walking, walked a lot of rivers as well, which has been quite nice. Been out doing quite a bit of photography. So we've got quite a lot of articles in the bag with myself and Mr. Proctor, some of which have already gone to print, and there's plenty more to come for the rest of the year. So yeah, it's been a tough time. Lots of ups and downs, getting used to, this terrible pandemic that's hit so many people hard. And it's just nice to be, dare I say, safe, well and healthy.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point. And it was interesting you said about the walking, and I know we were talking before we started recording, and you said you saw some mayflies yesterday as well.
I did, yeah. We finished up with our dinner and thought we were feeling a little bit bloated. Best get out, get a bit of air, get some steps under our belt. So we're very fortunate now. I'm living here in Newbury, so literally about 50 yards as the crow flies from where I am, the River Lambourne flows past, and of course we've got the Kennet as well. So we went for a wee wander last night, saw some beautiful little wild brownies, saw a couple of very good grayling. Quite a lot of fly coming off, some caddies coming off, a few little blue-winged olives, and then out of nowhere, a lovely great big mayfly dun hatches off about sort of 6:30 last night, and was then shadowed by a couple of little wild trout as it fluttered above the water. So yeah, it's good to see. It's quite early, 12th of May, especially with the weird weather we've been having. We spoke about how cold the nights have been throughout April, and we've only just started to see the main part of the hawthorn fly here, which is, quite late for us, but they seem to be out in relatively good numbers. And because it's been windy as well, and no doubt they've been falling on the river, and the few trout have been getting a bit of weight on after the lean winter. So yeah, it's all starting to come together, but yeah, it's been weird times.
Yeah. Interesting you mentioned the hawthorn, and it fascinates me, that hatch, and I've been known to be cutting the grass and seeing the hawthorn suddenly come pouring off, leave the mower and hit the river. But for me personally, it's never been a hatch that has really sort of taken off. I remember one time guiding and somebody asked me about hawthorn, and I said, yeah, it's not a hatch that's really important. And of course, the only fish we could catch were on hawthorn during that day. So that one bit me. But I know on the chalk streams, it's a hatch that people pay really close attention to, isn't it? Just ahead of the mayfly.
Yeah, I think, there's a lot of rivers, chalk streams in particular in the south, that they've seen a big decline in their species and numbers of fly hatching. So, what maybe wasn't such a predominant hatch before, or an important hatch, has suddenly taken a bit more of a front seat rather than a back seat because of the decline of other species. And certainly on days when it's windy, they're like the British equivalent of a cicada in how bad they can fly. So, you have a bit of wind and all of a sudden they're all over the place and they're dropping on the water, and the fish will happily take them because they're quite a big old meaty morsel. But if you've got calm conditions, they don't get anywhere near the water, because they can just go where they want, and they'll get up in the trees and they'll mate and away they go. So I think it has probably become a bigger hatch in its importance than it probably was in the past.
Yeah, that's a good point. I remember hitting Roadford actually a number of years ago, and we hit it just right with hawthorn falling, and we were almost just casting really leaders onto the water, and the fish were just working up as you say, as the flies are blown onto the water and eating those. And they're those little moments, aren't they? And during these, I suppose, strange times, it's those little things you focus on, don't you? You think about those special days on the water or those little moments, and they sort of pop into your head, don't they?
Yeah, I mean, we've also seen an awful lot of little black beetles as well. A lot more than I can remember for quite some time. And I've seen plenty of fish splashing on those. But I think probably that in the last 12 months for me, even more so than previous years, is that I've spent so much time not necessarily fishing, but watching rivers or watching other people fish. And I get a great enjoyment out of just walking a river and watching, I'm turning my missus into a prime clear river trout spotter now. She's getting really good at it. It's just showing her what to look for. Having grown up on a tiny little chalk stream in the Lincolnshire Wolds with small wild fish, they saw you long before you saw them. So if you weren't on your game, you'd never have seen a fish. You'd have thought it was devoid. So, even on a fast flowing river with lots of shiny silvery water, I'm still picking out fish. So, the appreciation of the environment, and particularly, it's something that's become very high on the agenda for a lot of people over the last 12 months with, a lot of people in isolation, not being able to see friends and family, and mental health and getting out in the fresh air. I've done more walking in the last 12 months than I've done probably in the last 12 years. Not saying that I'm lazy, but I've made a concerted effort to go out and walk. And then I'm looking at my iWatch, at the end of the week, and I'm like, I've done 55,000 steps and walked 28 miles. And that's a regular weekly occurrence that I'm doing a marathon walking along rivers around here and canals and lakes. And we're blessed here. We're surrounded by it. And I could just wander off on, if the other half's at work, I'll take a wander off if it's not chucking it down with rain, and spend an hour or so along the side of the river just watching what's happening, and occasionally bump into another fisherman. And you know what it's like when a couple of anglers get together, regardless of the disciplines, whether they're trotting or, if they've been out with the little spinners, you just get chatting. So it's been nice from that, to get out and appreciate the rivers, not just with a rod in the hand trying to catch fish myself, but I could sit and watch fish feeding and watch how they behave and sit on their lies and how many flies they take and how many they leave. And yeah, it's always a learning curve. And I think anyone that ever thinks in fishing that they know it all, they're sadly mistaken, because you never stop learning. And if you think you know it all, give it up and take golf, go golfing instead.
Yeah, very wise words. Funnily enough, I put a post out on my personal Facebook yesterday about a fish that beat me up the other day. And I was fishing with a friend and I thought, it's rising. I might get a chance at this. Couldn't catch it. Went back yesterday and watched for a bit, caught it. And somebody said, oh, wow. And I said, that's the really cool thing, is that you never stop learning. No matter how much time you spend on the water, you still learn something new. And I try every time I'm down there to try and observe something, learn something, spot something that I can take with me. And like you say, when you talk to other anglers, and in the world we live in now, it's easy to share that sort of information. It's good to share that sort of information too, isn't it?
Yeah, I think fishermen are. It's quite interesting because in the last few years we've seen a lot of coarse anglers migrate into fly fishing, particularly people that are married, they've got young kids, they've got time constraints, they can't go and plan a 2 or 3 day away coarse fishing trip, but they can manage to grab 2 or 3 hours on a small catch and release lake like ours in an evening, and the stuff's in the boot of the car. 5 minutes after they get there, they're tackled up and they're off to fish, and 5 minutes after they've finished, they're tackled away and they're off to the pub for a pint or go home to see the kids. So we've seen a lot of people moving over into the fly fishing, but one of the things that they almost immediately comment on is how freely fly fishermen pass on information and help each other. If you see somebody struggling on a lake, I mean, I do it, and most instructors I know do it, is that, without trying to sort of interfere, you'll sort of go over and give them a few pointers and a few bits of help to try and improve their casting, or give them, are you struggling with, what you're catching? Well, I've been catching on X, Y, and Z. Here, have one. Whereas they say in the course fishing side of things, it's very secret squirrels. They don't want to give any information about where they're fishing, how they're fishing, particularly if they're catching big carp more than anything else. They just clam up, and they're not open to share that because they think they've got some kind of a competitive advantage over another angler. Whereas they all say in the fly fishing side of things, I walk in here, I don't even need to ask. You just tell me everything that I need to know without, there's no sort of premise about what you're going to gain in return. You'll just tell me how to make my fishing better. And I think that's great in the fly fishing side of things.
And do you think, as an instructor as well, and I know when I was guiding stroke instructing, that I often used to say to people, I just want you to love it. Even if it's 10% of what I do, that'll be enough. And do you think that's because of the community, like you say, but also that you are an instructor and you teach people because you love it? And do you think some of that spills into those conversations and wanting to help people along the way too?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've been an instructor for a very long time, and God knows how many people I've helped to catch their first fish, and it's the look of sheer joy on their face. And not even if they catch a fish, but for the first time they get, something tugs back, and that excitement of, having a few ounces of carbon fibre in your hand, and all of a sudden you've got 2 or 3 pounds of mental trout at the other end running amok. That excitement, I still get a thrill from teaching, getting somebody to catch their first fish. And as you say, if they will enjoy it, even 10% of how much I've enjoyed it through my lifetime, well, they've got years ahead of them of having a really good, enjoyable, healthy outdoor pastime. And the more people that we can pass that on to, particularly younger generation, and I think from a fishing point of view, or an industry point of view, the pandemic's probably actually given fishing a bit of kick up the backside, because we've seen a lot of people that are now time rich, particularly if they've been on furlough. They've been able to travel, they did some brilliant stuff with making, talking to the government and getting fishing on that list of activities that you could do. And people have gone, do you know what? I haven't fished for 20 years, or, I've always wanted to, but I've not had the time. Well, now I've got some time. I'll take it up. And we've certainly seen sales, and talking to other guys in the industry, sales of like beginners kits, starter outfits, really, really picking up, of people coming back into the sport all first timers. So it's probably been inadvertently as big a year for people getting back into it, or getting started, that I could probably ever remember for 20 years probably. So, every cloud has a silver lining to a certain extent as far as the fishing industry goes. But, on the back of what's been an incredible, sad humanitarian crisis, to here we go, people are starting to take up fishing. It's good that people are getting out there. I think people have spent far too much time indoors over the last 13 months. So, getting out is great for them.
And I hope that trend continues as well. And I kind of think that, we've had this spike, as you say, and guests previously on the podcast have said that as well. And it does make me wonder if we're seeing that sort of spike that we saw in the Stillwater boom of the 70s, 80s, and whether we can maintain and keep those people engaged within fishing. And that'll be a really interesting one to see if that continues down the line in, say, a year's time, 2 years' time, if those people, and like you, I get people contact me almost daily saying, I've just come back to fly fishing after a long gap. It's been wonderful. So I try and do everything I can to encourage them, like you say, give them information. And I think if we can continue to motivate those people to want to do it, that's a good sign for our industry, isn't it? And our pastime and passion.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also think that from the point of view of accessible fishing, there's never been more day ticket waters or places for people to be easily able to get to where they've got a good chance of catching a fish. Depending on where you are on the country, Obviously, in the south, the fishing's far more expensive because it tends to lead towards big fish, catch and kill waters, less catch and release waters. But as you go up the country, you can go and fish a day for what in relative terms is far less than the cost of a round of golf. And they say it doesn't have to be a big planned out 5, 6, 7 hour event. You can just go and fish for a couple of hours and head home again. So the people are going to be able to get that accessibility, which is great.
Yeah, long may that continue. Now, before we move on, because there's so much I want to talk with you about, but you mentioned obviously the Lambourne and the Kennet being nearby, and they're obviously sometimes, and perhaps wrongly so, overlooked by the big name chalk streams of Hampshire. But interestingly to me, you also mentioned the Lincolnshire chalk stream that you grew up fishing as well. And it's those lovely, not so well known little streams that are, to me, are fascinating. And that Lincolnshire one, don't have to name names or anything like that, but they sound fantastic little venues.
Yeah, I mean, I was very fortunate that when I first got into fishing, the person who ultimately ended up being my instructor, just after I'd been out for a couple of days, half-assed fly fishing, not really knowing what I was doing, but being fortunate enough to catch a big fish. My first fish, I think, was £6, 15 ounces from a small still water where I lived. So, of course, age 9, I was like, wow, this is easy, I'm hooked. And my dad said, look, it seems like you really enjoy it. I'd course fished since ever I could remember. And he said, well, let's get you a lesson and see how you get on. And it was a guy, an excellent instructor who I learned an awful lot from, called Robert Gibson Bevan, who had this small syndicate of, I think it was something like 40 rods, for 6 miles of a river called the Great O in the Lincolnshire Wolds. Not a very well-known river at all, but it is a chalk stream. And then when people think about chalk, they always think about the south of England, Hampshire, Wiltshire. But it actually, if you look at a map of the UK, it goes all the way around through Suffolk and Norfolk into Lincolnshire, up into Yorkshire. This raft of chalk, and there are chalk streams all over the place. Obviously your big names, you're always talking about the Test, the Itchen, the Avon, rivers like that. But there are lots of others that you can find. Driffield Beck, I think that's the most northern chalk stream that we have. But they are all over. And it's a very different type of fishing to a freestone rain-fed river. Where, you can ultimately, if you've got a half decent pair of Polaroids and you've got a bit of an eye for detail and movement, you can spot the fish and you can target the individual fish that you're going at. Whereas the sort of stuff that we quite often do with the chalk stream, the non-chalk stream, the freestone rivers, you can't very often see the fish unless the light's in the right position, you're in the right place, the fish is on the right lie. So you're having to think like a fish. So it's a very different set of disciplines for each one. But I grew up, it was 8 to 15 foot wide in places, 20 probably at the most. Little 6 foot rods, 3 and 4 weights, wild fish, so substituted with a few stock fish. But that was my grounding for all of my future fishing. I really did more on the rivers long before I started big on the still waters. So making that transition from river to still water, for me, I always find is far, far easier than going from still water to river, because you have a lot more rivercraft as a river angler than you do rivercraft and watercraft as a still water angler. So you're at a distinct advantage going from river to still than still to river. So I was in the lucky position that I had that extra step when I did turn more to the still water side of stuff, which I thoroughly enjoyed and still do. But running water is, that kind of living, breathing, changeable thing that a river is. I still, with my trout fishing, get the most enjoyment out of rivers.
So that 6-pounder, was that sort of like you say, as a youngster catching that great big fish, did the course fishing as a result of that sort of fall by the wayside, or were you continuing to do that? Did you sort of, think, yeah, fly fishing, that's it? And then having Robert as a mentor, was that just natural that you flowed into that from there?
I kind of, I would do whatever I was able to get my hands on. If that meant, and I do miss my course fishing, and it's something that I'd like to get back into more of. It's one of those things, sitting by a float next to some lily pads, watching some tench bubble or something like that. I miss that. And it's something that, I'd like to get back into, particularly because I'm surrounded by course fishing lakes here within a 5-minute walk. But the fly fishing did very quickly accelerate to become the number one choice. And then, developed onto fly fishing for carp, because again, I had a carp lake that was very close to me, and I had fly fishing tackle, and spoke to the owners and said, yeah, no problem at all. And this is going back to probably around about 93 to 96, something around. It's quite a long time ago. And we were fishing, carp on the fly. But the fly rod as a method of fishing certainly became the number one priority over course fishing.
Yeah. And I remember that you were obviously writing about these things for a very long time. You've been doing that. And the instructor side of it, I know we've touched on it. And where did that, because I seem to recall that you were qualified at a seriously young age, weren't you?
Yeah, if memory serves me right, I was 16. Myself and Sean Cockliff both qualified at the age of 16, so we were the two youngest around, because prior to that I think you had to be 21 or at least 18 to do your exams. So as soon as we both turned old enough, we did our what in those days was STANIC, the Salmon Trout Association's National Instructor Certificate. So just coming up this year to my 40th birthday. So I've been an instructor way longer than I have been not an instructor. So, but it was one of those things where you kind of a few suggestions here and there. And, when you're at school and someone says, what do you want to do for a living when you grow up? And it was like, I want to fly fish. I want to fish. That's what I want to do. And kind of, always got, that was always my lead. My desire was to be inside of the fishing industry. It came to fruition. And I mean, my father used to say to me, God rest his soul when he was still alive, if you do something you enjoy for a living, you'll never work a day in your life. And to a certain extent, that's absolutely true inside of the fishing industry. He never told me I'd never be a rich man. Which you should have done. I could have worked a bit harder at school then. But you enjoy your life. You enjoy your lifestyle, and I've been very fortunate to get into the fishing industry and to a certain extent make a little bit of name for myself. And I've had a lot of benefits from that, and I've been to a lot of amazing places.
Yeah. We'll come on to those places shortly. I'm still interested to learn your sort of timeline there, and being an instructor at 16 and then making that decision that fly fishing was for you is really, really interesting. And again, without appearing stalkery, I seem to remember that you were working in the Orvis store somewhere or other. And was that your first sort of job, as it were, in fly fishing?
Inside of fly fishing, yeah. I mean, I'd helped in a local course fishing shop when I was much younger, and then went to university, finished my degree at the same time as Orvis were opening their outlet store in Spalding. So I ended up coming straight out of university and straight into assistant manager of the store in Spalding, and then they opened up a store in Bakewell. And I transfer over there as assistant manager under a good friend of mine, Gemma Tibbles. And then she left because she had a great opportunity to go elsewhere, and I took over as manager, and I was there for several years before Sportfish were advertising for an instructor. And then I went solely down the route of just completely fishing tackle rather than the ladies' clothing and the outdoor apparel that comes with the Orvis side of things. And I started with Sportfish 2008. So it's been a fair old time with them now. So it's, the South is now very much my home, and we're lucky with the teaching school that we have a lot of people coming through, and, from people that are complete and utter first timers who've never picked up a fly rod, which is always the best place to start, through to people that want to learn a little bit of improver, more advanced, and then guys that also think, I'd like to learn some really advanced distance casting techniques, or I want to hone my saltwater techniques so that I can punch that fly a little bit further for those, hard to reach fish, or, I just want to add another 10 or 15 feet to my spey cast, or I want to use my left hand. And, we can all that stuff is tailored to the individual, but it's a great platform to not only teach and pass on information to first timers or improvers, but just to see the enjoyment that people get and to help them to improve their catches. It's been a big part of my life for so long now, the teaching, and I still get that thrill.
It's fascinating what you say about the teaching at Sportfish, because to me that is, from where I was doing it, I knew what I was getting from that day with the person, but there must be there particularly so much variety that you're getting on a day in, day out basis, aren't you, of lessons that you're giving and the tuition you're giving?
Yeah, you do. You get a whole massive range of a massive gamut of people, from, say, the very first time they're coming and doing the beginner stillwater courses, through to guys that, and this is what I really like to see, is we have guys that come and do the beginner stillwater course, and then 6 months later they come and do their first day's chalk stream, and then another 6 to 12 months later they come and do a residential wharf course where they're learning northern freestone river fishing with every other technique under the sun, and how to read a river, catching wild fish. Then they'll progress to that, and then they'll go into a sea trout course down on the Towie, and then they'll get into the sea trout fishing, and before you know it, they've got a double hander in their in their hands, and they're fishing on the Tyne on a spring river course. And then the year after they go, well, I've booked to go for a week in Mexico. And you're like, now that's that whole transition from having never picked up a rod before to, you're going out catching bonefish. This is wicked. And you've watched them through every stage. It's great to see how people progress as well, so yeah, it's very varied, but you do see people come back and you watch them grow through their fly fishing career, and it's great to see.
Fantastic. While we're on casting, I know you've competed in competition, I guess, distance casting. How have you found that, and can you give me a sense of what a competition tends to be like?
So competitions have changed an awful lot over the years. From my point of view, basically the only competitions you used to get in the old days were the likes of Chatsworth Angling Fair, CLA Game Fair. There'd be a few little country shows here and there where there'd be a casting competition, and that was pretty much it. And I was fortunate that I'd been to most of those shows, and I'd won an awful lot of those competitions. And then it was probably around about 2004, because once it was a bit of a gentleman's agreement that when you became a qualified instructor, you didn't go and do your Chatsworths and your game fairs and things like that because you were a qualified instructor. So it kind of all went on a back burner for me then. And then I got involved with the BFCC, the British Fly Casting Club, around, I say it was probably around 2004, somewhere around there. And then all of a sudden you had a specific club that did distance casting competitions, and they did them several times a year around the country, and it gave you an opportunity to do a 5-weight distance, a 7-weight distance, doing T38, the proper tournament casting stuff, the T120 double-handed tournament casting stuff. And then whispers sort of developed that there was going to be a world championship in fly casting using fishing tackle. So not the out-and-out hardcore tournament casting stuff, but using fishing rods with fishing lines that we would use to go out every day and do our trout fishing. And that was going to be 2010 was the first one in Norway. So there was a very small contingent of us. We got together. I think it was about 2 or 3 from GB, plus from England, a couple of guys from Scotland, and a few Irish guys, who at the time, that was kind of like the whole British upper echelons of distance casting together in one place. The likes of Gerard Downey, Rory Costello, James Chalmers, Paul Arden, myself, Lee Cummings, and that was pretty much it. And And then it started to develop. There was another one 2 years later, another one 2 years later after that. And then Lee Cummings very much took it by the scruff of the neck and brought on with the UK United Kingdom fly casting team. We hosted in 2018, a fantastic event that it was. And, you know, it's just gone on from there, and it's developed hugely, not just in the amount of support, but also if you look back at distances from 15 years ago, you know, you would win a 5-weight distance with 100, 105, maybe 110 foot. Now, if you're not doing 125, 120, depending on the weather, you probably won't even finish top 3 or top 5. And regularly you're having to cast in excess of 130 feet to place, which is a phenomenal increase in distances. But with that change from the out-and-out tournament stuff to the fishing tackle side of things, new disciplines came into it as well. So we had the 5-weight distance casting, which was a 5-weight Scientific Anglers MED 120 fly line. So we all use the same fly line. You can use any rod up to 9 foot long, I think it is. Any line rating. So you were having guys casting with 8 weights, 9 weights, 7 weights, 5 weights, whatever suited their casting or the conditions. You had what they called the C-trap distance, which is a 27 gram shooting head, rods up to 10 foot. Casts there can be, you know, high 50s into low 60s meters, which is a phenomenal distance with a 27 gram fly line. 15 foot salmon overheads with a 55 gram shooting head. And these distances go upwards of 70 meters. You had your traditional 5-weight accuracy, casting, which we've all seen before. And then you had your 15 foot spay from water, which was a combination of a left hand up and a right hand up. So you had to do off both shoulders. Winning distances for that can be 120 meters. You know, you're looking at 60 meters off each side. And then your 18 foot spay from platform, which is either left or right. You can choose depending on whether you're left-handed or right-handed, which one's your dominant hand. And again, I think the world record now is 77 meters for a single spay, which is monstrous, which most of those, a lot of the world records had been set up in Millom at the UK hosted World Championships. And to see a spay line going 70 meters plus, and it wasn't just like, that's a one-off cast at 70 odd meters. It was like, there were several guys on the same day broke the world record in one day. We were standing there watching it. It went from like 70 meters, 0.63 to 72 to 74 to 76 to 77. You're like, this is phenomenal. This is out of the world distances. And that's, you know, we love the distance casting side of stuff. And there's a great team spirit amongst the guys. We all support and help each other. We obviously all want to win as well. You know, we had the first UK overall championships, 2019, at the same location where we had the men's, we had the veterans, and we had the women's, which I was fortunate enough to win the overall men's title. But we all like to help each other out as well. You know, we support each other a lot because it's an expensive pastime for just casting. And you don't get financial support because nobody's interested in giving you money to go and cast long distances in a field somewhere. So, you know, for each individual, you've got to spend a lot of time and money buying lines, rods and things like that, which are never going to see a fly. They're just purely for hiking it as far as you can. And it's a whole different sport inside of fly fishing. And they're very separate, but equally they also link very well together. If you can cast a fly a long way, then, you know, if you can chuck 120 feet, how easy is it then to throw 80 feet with perfect presentation? So even if you go, well, I'm a fly fisherman, but I'm not interested in distance casting, improving your casting will improve your fishing. There is no doubt about that. And yes, they are separate disciplines, but they do very much come together and interact to improve each other.
Yeah. to me at least, putting that into context as well, some of those distances, and I use the 5-weight purely because I've played with it a little bit with Lee, funnily enough. And, you know, people often say, well, I cast the full fly line, so they assume that's 90 foot plus 10 foot of leader, which we know is probably 70, 80 feet against the tape measure. So that 125, I think I've thrown it once close to, short of that, not 125, but I think I got low 120s, if that. It was a complete fluke, I'm sure. But it's an extraordinary thing. And while you were saying that, it was fascinating to think about it, because I had Jason Borger on here a little while back, and we were talking about the Golden Gate Club. And I was thinking, wow, it'd be a dream one time to go along there and have a little bit of a cast. And I always get the impression that's quite a busy place with lots of people. And, you know, I think he said as a youngster, they were hanging around there, and the Ray Jeff brothers and everything else. Whereas here it seems a small, dedicated bunch of people. Do you sense that's the case? And is there a way of getting more people interested in it? I know you tour around the UK doing various events. Do you get good turnout from that? Do you add people to that? Or is it just one of those things, like you say, is a different aspect of what we do, yet, as you rightly say, it is something that is going to improve your fishing if you do it?
Well, the BFCC started to take over the casting at what was the CLA Game Fair a few years back, and then brought in those World Championship events at the show rather than just a straight out distance and a straight out accuracy. So it also gave us another opportunity to have a competition. So, you know, the group of us we'd man it, we'd judge it, we'd compete in it, you know, so we took complete ownership of that. But equally, the people that came along, we were introducing and doing tuition at the same time. And it just let that whole thing grow. You know, the likes of Mike Heritage would be doing a lot of tuition with other people. There's so many names. I know I'll miss people out, but apologies because I have. But you know, we were not only bringing people on and teaching them as well to get a little bit further. Because when you stand there and you look at, you know, the likes of James Evans or Steve Parks or Lee standing on a platform, lobbing a single-handed rod 130, 140, or, you know, with an ST27 way in excess of that, people just stand there in awe and watch, and they go, I want to do that, or I want to try that. And then, you know, the likes of Mike Heritage will be standing there going, come this way, let's go and have a cast. You know, it's your fiver for your 10 minutes or whatever it is of your tuition, which goes back into funding the club. And off they go, and the next year you see them, and they come back at the next show, and they're like, yeah, I've been practicing. And all of a sudden they've added 15, 20 feet to their cast. And it's that's given them the little kind of G on to get into it and put a little bit of time and effort into it. And then you find, you know, my fishing's improved because of it. And it's all just because they've you know, stood there and seen someone on a casting platform chuck into the horizon and gone, wow, I'd like to have a crack at that. So we are growing it, and we've grown the membership, but it is still quite a niche thing that a lot of people just look at and go, I'm not interested in it because I catch fish. But, you know, each to their own.
Yeah. While I've got you on that, though, you know, one of the common things, as you've mentioned, is people wanting to cast a little bit further. What advice would you give someone, apologies for putting you on the spot a little bit, but what advice would you give someone looking to improve and cast a little bit further?
There's lots of things to look at. I mean, being inside of the trade, we very much have the fortune that we can try lots of different lines with lots of different rods. And quite often with a lot of people, it's not a case of stripping their casting back down to zero, and then building it back up from you know, the ground. It's a little tweak here and a little tweak there makes a massive difference out there. But even just something like buying a different fly line, you know, with the best will in the world, Joe Average can't cast a 50-foot head 50 foot of weighted part of the fly line where they need to aerialize that line to get the most out of the fly line. But if you put them down onto a 32, 35 foot head, well, all of a sudden you're only on 3.5 rods length worth of line that you have to aerialize before your rod is at full bending, full loading, and then you can shoot. And it's little things like, blokes, especially in fishing, we are the worst for it. If we want to try and cast 60 feet, we'll try and aerialize 59.5 feet of that line and shoot 6 inches. The whole point with fly line design and how much they've come on is that they are not only designed to make your life easy, they're also idiot proof. You've got bright pink and bright green, and where the bright pink and the bright green meet, that's your optimum loading point. When that gets to the end of the rod, let it go. Don't do an extra 2, 3, 4, 5 casts and collapse the cast. Pick up the heavy bit, shoot the thin bit. And it's little tweaks like that, just the understanding. Because if you haven't had somebody explain it to you, it is a minefield. Because there's so many different lines out there with so many different tapers, and every man's casting technique is slightly different. Some will suit some won't suit others. And it's just looking at somebody for 5 minutes, and you can automatically go, right, if I give you this line on that rod that you've got, that automatically is going to change your casting. If I then show you exactly where to load it from, even if I don't teach you a single hole, a double hole, drift, anything like that, I can just simply give you that fly line and explain to you how to use it, and automatically you'll make less false casts, you'll cast further, and in theory, you'll catch more fish. And it's a little simple thing like that, but if you haven't got the ability to go to a shop and do that, and sadly, there are more and more shops shutting all the time, and as great a thing as the internet is, there's no substitute for going in and speaking to somebody face to face and picking something up and trying it. Long should we continue to try and preserve the tackle shop, because there's far too many empty shops with vacant written outside of them these days, where you can't do that, and you can't get that information online that you can face to face, physically holding it. So yeah, just a few tweaks here and there can change people's casting by 50% in 5 minutes, just from changing their tackle setup. Just simply with a fly line.
Great points there. And, it's music to my ears what you're saying there, because for so long on here as well, we've been talking about the importance of the fly line. Think about the fly line for the fishing you're doing, and that makes your life so much easier. So that's absolute music to my ears. So thank you for that. We're going to move on a little bit. I know you're equally as at home with a camera in your hand as well as a fly rod, and you've shot many covers for magazines and articles, and like you say, I know you did one for Trout and Salmon a couple of months ago, and articles and everything else that goes with it. But I wanted to go back a little bit further and have to say how much I thoroughly enjoyed the film that you made, A Year in the Life, that took us around the world pretty much, chasing fresh and saltwater fish. That must have been amazing fun to do and to put together too.
It was. I mean, it was one of those, you sort of sit down and have a beer with Matt McHugh at Fly Odyssey, and we were sort of thinking about what we were going to do over the next 12, 18 months with, I was doing a lot of hosting and taking trips around the world with clients with him. And more and more the filming side of things has sort of gone in. We made a couple of films prior to that. We'd done the Uncharted Waters Bassas de India film, the Uncharted Waters the Primeras, which were a little bit out of left field for a lot of anglers, and I decided I wanted to make something that was purely fly fishing. So I was very fortunate that Fly Odyssey and Matt gave me a great help, as they always do, with going, finding different locations and then tagging along with some great anglers. So, as we've spoken about before, Paul Proctor and I have been great friends for too many years. And we've been fortunate we've fished together all over the world. And I never tire of watching Paul fish, because I always learn something when I watch him. And he's great in front of camera, and that if there's an 8-pound wild brownie sitting in some little tiny backstream in New Zealand sipping on whatever, you can normally put your mortgage on it that he's going to put a good presentation on it. And if somebody's going to pull it out for camera, quite often it's going to be him. I had the legend that is Charles Jardine. He was also involved in the chalk stream side of things. So we did English chalk streams. There we had God rest his soul, Manuel Chac over in Mexico at Casavio chasing saltwater species. We went out to see the guys in Christmas Island out in the Pacific. Just an all-round amazing location, as well as, not just from a fishing point of view, but obviously the history that goes with it, with testing of the nuclear bombs and we headed up to Iceland, myself and Paul, to fish the mini Valalaka and the big Laxa. So some incredible fishing in Iceland just on our doorstep. And then a couple of weeks in New Zealand, traipsing around and yomping miles and miles to try and find some monstrous fish. So all in all, it was, five locations. We filmed over 12 months. And it was about an 18-month project from start to finish to give us the finished 60-odd minute film. And it was a real pleasure making it. I could have made it 5 hours long. It was the hardest part was getting it down to sort of 60 minutes or so, because there was just so much stuff I had to lose and leave on the cutting room floor. But, watching those guys, Gilly Bate was another one that was involved, Mark Windsor, Duff Batty, watching them. And it wasn't, because we all love a bit of fish porn, let's not lie. We all love seeing big fish around the world. And I didn't want to make it one of those films that was lots of hooping and hollering and shouting and high-fiving. And I wanted something I wanted a finished product that you could sit down and watch with your missus, who doesn't have any interest in fishing. And at the end of 60 minutes, she'd go, we should book a holiday to New Zealand, or I'd love to go to Iceland. And it was more to do with the locations and why every year you travel 48 hours to the other side of the world on a tin can. Why do you religiously go back to Mexico? What is it? What's the lure of rivers like the Test and the Itchen and the Frome? Why do you keep coming back to them? What is it about permit that makes you shake like a shitting dog every time you see one? And it was getting inside of the minds of not just the fishermen, the guides as well, and seeing stunning locations that any one of us can go and visit. And equally, most of them are relatively good value. You're not talking about 15 grand for a week in Cosmolido. This is, you go in and doing a week for a couple of grand in Mexico. So it's also stuff that you could realistically, even if it meant saying 18 months from now, 2 years from now, I'm planning it now, you can manage to save the money to do it. So it was accessible fishing, but it was why do people keep going back to these places? What's the lure of it? What gets in here and in here that says, shit, I can't wait to come back. That big fish sitting on that lie in the mini, and you're going, that was £9 last time I was here. It's 10 now. I still haven't caught it, but next time it'll be 11 and I'm going to get it. So it was more doing I suppose you could call it a travel documentary with fishing, rather than here is an out and out fish porn film. You've got the action, you've got beautiful vistas, lovely scenery. You've got the pieces to camera of each individual telling you, the viewer, why you need to get off your arse and go to these places and why they keep going back. So it was something a bit different. And I had lots of people, when the film first came out, because it was available first just on Vimeo, and then now you can get it on Fishing TV. But I had lots of people message me and say, I sat and watched it with the missus, and she said we can go to Iceland next year, or she really wants to go to Mexico. And she enjoyed the film because it wasn't just fishing. It was the whole package that makes us get out of bed in the morning and pack our shit into the car and go fishing, or travel 20 odd hours across the other side of the world. And that's what I was looking for. And I'd like to think that's exactly what we achieved. And certainly what people have said, that is what we achieved. So yeah, I was very, very pleased with the end result.
Well, I think you pulled it off. And my next question is, would you like to do another one? And is there a way that you can do another one? Are you going to?
I'd absolutely love to do another one, even if it was just a case of doing a specific location. And I think it's a difficult one because everybody sits there and goes, there's not enough fishing being done on film of good quality that I can sit and watch that is not 5 minutes long. I want to sit down for an hour. And then you spend all that time and all that effort and all that money to produce a film that's an hour. And then you go, here you go, guys. And everyone watches the trailer and they go, that's amazing. I love it. Can't wait to see it. And then you go, it's $5.99 to rent it. And they go, what? I've got to pay for it. And you go, well, yeah, because there's hundreds of hours and thousands of miles and, just expensive excess baggage. And you go, I'm not doing this to make money. I know I'm never going to make money from it, but equally, I'm not doing it just for the love of it. It needs to pay for itself. And there's a real reluctance of people to want to, they cry out for it. But when it comes to it, even like $5.99, which is what, living in the South, that's about a pint and a half. They're reluctant to put their hands in their pocket to watch it. And I've seen a lot of stuff as well that you see a trailer for something and you go, oh, that looks amazing. And then you see that the finished film is 18 minutes long and you're like, I want it to be an hour. I want to sit down and watch something that I can, crack open a beer, just immerse myself in it for a long period of time. And it's difficult to try and or financially justify doing it because it is money that's coming out of your own pocket and it's money that's coming out of the pockets of the likes of Fly Odyssey and the lodges and things like that. And it just needs to be something that isn't going to be a loss. It has to break even. And if people give it the support to make sure that these projects that people do break even or even make a few quid, then people will continue to make them. But if the support's not there, people can't cry out for it to be done if they're not willing to support it when it's finished. I was very fortunate with that film because it got lots of really good reviews and people raved about it. And it did cover its costs. But I'm not putting down a down payment on a new Porsche.
Yeah. Well, I suppose YouTube makes that difficult, doesn't it? With people uploading content, like you say, in some cases, not in all cases, but in some cases good, that makes that difficult. And I guess the difficult the dilemma that you have to go down or you want to go down to fund these things to allow it to go out into that mainstream is probably sponsorship, isn't it?
It is. And the other side of things you get with sponsorship is that, and I've been very fortunate, the likes of Costa, Sage, Rio, Nautilus, Columbia, just to name a few of the sponsors that we've had in the past on various projects. And they're brilliant when it comes to giving you all the tackle that you need. And when you go into some of the places out in the middle of nowhere where you're going to kill 8, 10, 12 fly lines on coral and things like that, it's a godsend to have that big bag of extra lines, to have those flat shirts, to have the good glasses, to have rods and reels and spare rods and reels for your spare rods and reels. Because when you're in the middle of nowhere, if you haven't got it with you and you run out, you're stuck. And that side of things is fantastic. But there's very little in the way of any kind of financial production costs cover, which, and I understand why. And, and it's been the same in every type of fishing sponsorship related side of things for years. And you only have to look at the competition side of fishing where prize money used to be up here and it's slowly dropped over the years to where, a first prize is 500 or £1,000 where it used to be 10,000 plus pounds. And there isn't people don't want to pump the money into physical hard cash into things like that because they're not going to likely see the return on it, but they can give you the tackle and stuff, which, we absolutely appreciate more than you can imagine because it's, not just shipping stuff around the world, but having your guys using stuff that isn't going to let them down, godsend. But physically getting cash for filming projects is a very, very difficult thing to do. That's why there's a lot of sort of crowdfunders and startup setups where people are raising funds, because people don't actually realize how expensive filming is. And it's not just the huge amount of time in edit and filming and transport and everything else, but it's the tens of £1,000s, worth of equipment that whoever's doing it has paid for in the first place as well. Their experience and, all the audio equipment and everything else that goes with it. It's a massive thing. And and I see it with clients. They go, "Oh, well, I'm only looking for a 2-minute finished film for my website." And you go, "Okay, that's great. It's just 2 minutes. It's an easy thing to do." And you go, "Well, it might be a 2-minute finished article, but it isn't 2 minutes to do it. You've got a lot more that goes into it. You've got to film it, you've got to edit it, you've got to sort out the sound, you've got to sort out the colouring. You then got to put in all your titles and everything else and finish that 2 minutes that you think, oh, that's amazing for 2 minutes. But there's a lot of hours goes in to making that finished product, and that's the problem, is that people don't appreciate what goes into it. And when you balance that between your finished product and the amount of time that goes into it, it's a tiny, tiny little bit is the finished product in comparison to how much time goes into it, and the monetary cost that goes into it as well. So yeah, it's equating one to the other is very difficult for most people that haven't got any idea of what really goes into the production of any kind of film.
Yeah, and I always say, even in the background in our little magazine, that editing takes a hell of a lot of time, and with a film I can't imagine how much goes into that, and to get it right and everything that goes with it. So you have my utmost respect for that. So you've travelled a fair bit. Where is your dream destination? Where's the one place that you've not been, or the place you would love to go back to?
I think if I could go, money no object, go anywhere, I would love to tick Cosmolido off my list at some point. Cozzy's been one of those places that, especially throughout that whole Somali pirates shutdown for several years, just let it go back to being untouched. And I love the untouched side of things. Some incredible GT fishing, and that's something that I would, if I could get enough money for a kidney, that's what, on the black market, I'd be heading there, but I don't think I could. But, it's sort of $15,000 plus your flights, beers and tips for a week. And that's just never in a million years. Is that something that, unless I get a lottery win, is that going to be a realization? But that is top of my list of places that I would die to go to. Places to revisit. I would love to go back to Bassist, India. Which is where we made our first film back in 2011. Remote underwater atoll, remote underwater volcano, rises up from 3,000 meters, slap bang in the middle of the Indian Ocean between Mozambique and Madagascar, middle of nowhere, 250 odd miles away from the nearest piece of land. Jurassic Park, but you can't get to it anymore. It's been shut down basically by the French Navy, French forces. Like most of the places around that part of the world, the French lay claim to the vast majority of it. And they've had issues there with the harvesting of sea cucumbers, amongst other things. And they've just said, arrête, ça suffit, we are not having this, go away, you little boats. So you can't go anywhere near the atoll anymore. And having it been left on its own for so long without anybody fishing on it, I would love to go back there. But as far as places that are special to me, the first place I saltwater fly fish was Belize, which will always hold a very special place in my heart. Mexico, for an all-round flats destination, I still think is one of the hardest places in the world to beat. You've got bonefish, you've got tarpon, you've got great snook fishing, not to mention jacks and triggers and everything else, and you have the best permit fishery in the world. And as a permit junkie, that's like the drug for a lot of saltwater fly fishermen. And that is, for me, I've never been anywhere that betters it. And you can get 40, 50 shots at permit in a day, in the right conditions when the fish are around. And it is a numbers game. The more shots you have, the more chance you've got of catching one. And when you get in that numbers, I think our best trip was 30 30 permit landed for the trip. And I think on one day between the group of us, we had 13 in one day. And Paul and myself had five to our boat. He had 3 and I had 2, which is phenomenal going anywhere. So as far as the salt goes, those are sort of 3 standout places for me. But trout fishing, I spent 2 and a bit weeks traipsing through New Zealand behind Mr. Proctor with a very heavy camera and tripod on my shoulder with a backpack with about another 20 kilos of stuff in it. And the law of New Zealand is if you fall behind, you stay behind. And if you've ever fished with Paul, you'll know he's a bit of a bloody racing snake. When he gets the bit between his teeth, he's off like a rat up a drain pipe. And, you know, it's not easy wading some of those rivers and stuff when you've got all that stuff on you. And I saw some incredibly large fish in some of the most stunning scenery in the world. And I'd love to go back and spend some proper time fishing in New Zealand. Love Iceland, love the people, love the fishing there. But just, it's a big place, the world, and we have a limited time here to see as much of it as we can. And I'd love just to see as much of it as I can. And I've been fortunate. I mean, I think I'm around 50 countries now, something along those lines in my life. Granted, I haven't fished them all, but there's a lot more places left to go and a lot more places left to fish. So the bucket list is long. It's just trying to tick off as many as I can. So
fantastic. Very, very good answers and wonderful places. We've been going over an hour now, and I wanted to. I feel like I've only scratched the surface, but
I thought it was about 25 minutes.
No. We've done really, really well, and there's so much more I wanted to talk to you about. But as someone who's worked in fly fishing shops, this must be a hard one because you're seeing so much stuff. But do you have a Hall of Fame rod? Is there one that you've said to yourself, "Wow, this is the one"? Or is it something, because we're seeing these things with resins, everything else, that rods are continually making changes, evolving a little bit. But is there one that you've always felt, yeah, that's the one?
I did what a lot of people need to do, and I've had some big culls. When I looked in the corner of the room and I was like, Jesus wept, what have I got 40 rods sitting there for? And you have to start being brutal with it. You go, when did I last use that rod? Okay, out. So I knocked it right back to the bare hardcore of what I really need. So obviously I've got my saltwater rods, 8s, 10s, 12s, 9s, 16s. The trout side of things, I've got a little tiny rod I use for little rivers, sort of 7'3" weight, which comes out once every 2 or 3 years, but I kind of need to have it there for those little situations. The days that I used to have like a 9'4" weight and a 10'4" weight, and I'd carry a couple of rods on the river, I've got 9.5 3 weight, which I pretty much use for everything now on a river, whether I'm wading it or not. The obligatory 10'7" weight, which everybody has. I'm quite a big fan of a 9'6" for a 6, so I've got one of those. And then the one rod that I've kind of held on to now for I don't know how many years, probably 15 years, is a 9'5" weight, 4-piece Sage TCR, which was my original distance casting rod, which has stayed with me and probably will stay with me for good. And I sadly had to have a cull of 1 or 2 of my father's old rods after he passed away, because a lot of them were 2-piece. So there was a 9'8" weight 2-piece SP Plus Sage, which was a fabulous rod I used to use for bass fishing. But sticking a 2-piece rod in the car was just a pain in the arse. So 2-piece rods went, 3-piece salmon rods went, and everything else. And I sort of kicked them all to the curb, apart from what was the hardcore. And certainly the TCR has stayed, and I don't think that's going anywhere. But if I was to buy new rods and replace them at the moment, I'm a massive fan of the new Sage Igniter. I've had a bit of a play with 1 or 2 of the new rods that are coming through right now, but not enough play to sort of really have a solid opinion on some of the other ones out there at the moment. But I love the Igniter. It suits my casting. And if I was buying new rods, I think that's from the TCR through now to the Igniter, it's been quite a big change. But I know a lot of people still love their old XPs and things, and like a 10-foot 7-weight for an XP is like most people's unicorn. They never see them anywhere secondhand, or people don't get rid of them. But I think every time you sort of set your hopes on a rod being, this is the one that's going to stay with me for the next 25 years, they always bring something out a bit better. But quite often it's not just a bit better, it's a lot better. And then you go, actually, might lose the love for that one, and I'll go for this one. So apart from a TCR, I think most of my rods are pretty much replaceable in one way or another. So yeah, that would be my only one that I've held on to, and say I've never had a rod so long, so I think it will stay around for a bit longer.
Nice. If it's any consolation, I've had massive rod culls, and I've still got my 5-weight TCR as well. And there's something about it, and it was terrible to fish with. For our little fish down here, I used to fish with it. I used to cast with it. I've done all sorts of stuff with it, and it's still a cracking rod. And yeah, there's something, I couldn't tell you why. I got rid of the 8-weight TCR, which I loved, and I kicked myself about that. I thought that was a great rod as well. But that 5-weight is fantastic. But it's been wonderful talking with you. If you mentioned guiding and stuff like that, how do people get hold of you if they want to have some tuition, if they want to do some guided fishing, if they want you to make them a film as well? How do they get hold of you?
So, I mean, the easiest place to get a hold of me is just info@smokingdragproductions.co.uk, which is SMOKIN, so not smoking, smokingdragproductions.co.uk, and that's the email that I'm on. So yeah, I mean, I'm still currently sitting on furlough, waiting to get back to work. So, you know, there's the odd bit of guiding I'm doing. I'm out next week with a good friend of mine who very sadly suffers with Parkinson's, and I go along and spend 3 days with him, being his gilly for the day. But yeah, otherwise, once we're back up and running at sport fishing, then that's where I'll be. So, but in the meantime, yeah, info@smokingdragproductions.co.uk.
Fantastic. JT, it's been always a pleasure to catch up with you, and thanks for taking the time to chat with me today.
It's been a pleasure, absolute pleasure, Pete. Nice to catch up as well, and hopefully we'll catch each other out on a fishing bag somewhere.
That sounds pretty cool to me. Everyone, this has been the Fly Culture Podcast. I hope you've enjoyed this one as much as me. Plenty more coming. Apologies, the last few haven't been on YouTube. I've had some technical issues, but hopefully we'll get this one out there to you. But everyone, thank you so much for listening to the Fly Culture Podcast.
The Fly Culture Podcast is brought to you in association with Fly Culture, a quarterly print magazine. For more information, please visit flyculturemag.com. You can also find Fly Culture on Instagram, Facebook and Twitter.